It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and thank you for the invitation. So today we're going to be talking about the futures of anticipatory governance. So first of all, we need to understand the environment in which governments are operating. And we discussed this a little bit yesterday, but we know that there are a number of polycrises. So these polycrises are technological disruption, which we are seeing with AI, developments in neurotechnology, quantum computing, synthetic biology, and how all of these technologies are converging together. We also, of course, see the disruption of climate change, rising inequalities, demographic transitions, and geopolitical instability. So these are all complex issues which require looking at futures in a more systemic way. And they also require governments to move beyond traditional forms of government systems, which were designed largely for a more stable world, to be able to be more anticipatory. We now need to move from short-term political cycles to be able to respond to crises in a much better manner than we do currently. So this really shifts the focus to preparedness, to resilience, and to adaptability. It also suggests moving from, because there's so much emphasis on polycrisis, that we want to also emphasize that this is an opportunity. So we talk about a polytunity. So this means how can we look at designing new socioeconomic systems? How can we integrate new forms of knowledge? And how can we develop new governance approaches? So since 1993, we have been working through the Management of Social Transformations program, which works with all of our member states, 194 member states, to enhance the uptake of evidence-based policymaking. We need to turn historical evidence into future-oriented knowledge. So anticipatory governance can enhance this evidence base. And these really remain essential. So what are we looking at? We're looking at informing, and this was brought up yesterday, taking Indigenous knowledge and the findings of Indigenous knowledge into the work that we're doing with governments on how we can better preserve our biodiversity and our ecosystems. How can we also integrate the humanities? We know, for example, that issues of trust are largely because there's a lack of confidence in institutions, a lack of confidence in science. So how can we address these issues to make our impact more widespread? Maybe I need a little glass of water. We also have been working through our work on futures literacy and foresight at UNESCO. So I don't know if you're familiar with the work of UNESCO, but we started futures literacy and foresight. We actually coined the term in 2012. And through our work in the Management of Social Transformation program, as Roland said, we've been rolling out these futures literacy labs in 50 countries. So we've had at least more than 120 capacity building initiatives, which have scanned really a range of issues. And we're also working with a number of our chairs. So we see these 37, and these chairs are growing. So these UNESCO chairs are our antennas in the field. They help us take in the research on specific areas. So we have chairs that are working in the area of futures of education, which are developing new pedagogical tools on how we can teach futures literacies in schools. We're also working with chairs that are working on how do we make futures more relevant for culture, using museums as spaces to talk about new ways of getting people to understand and appreciate their culture and their identity. And we're also looking at new areas of emerging technologies and what these emerging trends are telling us. So these antennas came together at World Futures Day. So we organize a number of these global fora to expand the knowledge and have an opportunity for engaging with a multitude of stakeholders in the Foresight community. But we want to move the Foresight community out of just this community. We want to expand it to other disciplines. And UNESCO is a key platform for that because we work in the area of education. So you may have seen the Futures of Education report. This is a key report that looks at what are the key necessary elements. We talk about AI literacy. We talk about the need to enhance our creative skills, but also I would include futures literacy as a key capacity that needs to be integrated into schools. And that's why we're working with chairs, such as our chair in Austria, on a conference next year in 2027, which will be working with teachers and researchers on how we can enhance the pedagogy of futures literacy. We also have a number of tools, publications. We developed most recently a signals report that was looking at generative AI. So we were looking particularly at the social issues related to AI, including cognitive offloading, issues around creativity, looking at the synthetic reality and how we try to differentiate what is real from what is fake. There were calls for a universal system to look at AI and to differentiate AI, a labeling system. So these are some of the areas in which UNESCO is working. We also have a bioethics committee, which also identifies emerging trends. So as I mentioned yesterday, we have the Global Ethics of AI recommendation, which provides the recommendations on how countries should be developing and implementing AI strategies which are ethical. So that means ensuring that humans are in the loop, that we have accountability, and that we have transparency. And we've supported countries in translating that through AI readiness frameworks and developing their national strategies on AI. But this, just to mention that this Global Ethics Committee helps us identify new and emerging issues. Just a second emerging issue, which is very recent and which I find quite interesting, is a new recommendation on ethics of neurotechnology. So this is, of course, something that's expanding very rapidly. We want to ensure that we keep our cognitive integrity and our mental integrity and our neural data. So these are some of the key issues that we're looking at, which have emerged from looking at early signals through our bioethics committee. Some of the work that we've been doing also with some of our member states include working to help to set up Foresight units, such as with the Greek Growth Fund, and now we're working with Cyprus, who has the EU presidency, on working to help set up their Foresight unit as well. We've also developed a number of toolkits, a playbook on futures literacy. For us, we need to really democratize the futures. So we want everybody to have this capability. We find that the futures and futures literacy is really a global good that should be accessible to all. And maybe just mentioning that as we work with our member states to enhance this capability, we want to use existing platforms. So one of the platforms that we used is the G20. So we worked with the G20 South African presidency on a visioning workshop to help them identify their legacies for the G20 presidency. So what did this result in? This resulted in a new AI for Africa initiative. So we aim to support Africa in helping them to develop their endogenous capacity on AI. So this included helping to expand and train judicial operators on what it means to use AI in the legal system. It also included providing support for students and teachers on AI curricula. And we also developed a technology policy assistance facility, which provides technical assistance on helping them to develop their AI national strategies and policies. So today we're here to talk about anticipatory governance. So this is a new approach, although others are working in the field, OECD, the World Economic Forum, but this is an approach which really aims to integrate foresight, preparedness, early warning, and adaptive policymaking into the core functions of government and public institutions to improve decision-making under conditions of complexity and uncertainty. We see that there's a growing shift towards anticipatory governance. This is, of course, one of the reasons why UNESCO and all of our 194 member states decided to adopt World Futures Day, which is on the 2nd of December. So I encourage you all to come to World Futures Day, which will be in Paris again this December. And we work with all of our UNESCO chairs on World Futures Day to bring in all of the research of our chairs and to make this day as impactful as possible. But we, of course, also see that this was recognized by the UN system in the UN Pact for the Future and the UN Declaration on Future Generations, adopted in September 2024. But just to note that UNESCO was a key contributor to the UN Declaration on Future Generations. And actually, UNESCO was the first one to develop this declaration in 1997. So you can see that we've been involved in this field for quite some time. So what we want to do at UNESCO is to really expand this capacity to all of our member states. We know that a number of member states, particularly in Europe, Finland, of course, but also Singapore has advanced capacity and has developed strategic foresight centers which offer advisory services to government. But we want to expand this capacity to other countries at UNESCO. And to do this, we want to draw in our interdisciplinary mandate. Of course, UNESCO has a new director general. We also have new senior leadership. So one of the first things that we're aiming to do is also to sensitize our senior leadership about the importance of futures literacy and foresight and how this can help in terms of the UN 80 process to reform the United Nations, but also as part of UNESCO's UNESCO 80 process to reform UNESCO and make it more effective and future-oriented. So some of the value that we will add to members is we will be developing, this will be a global peer network. And we will, of course, be providing technical assistance, expert support. We will be developing a foresight readiness assessment to identify where member states are in their trajectory on using futures literacy and foresight, and how we can help them to institutionalize a foresight through, for example, foresight units within government. As I mentioned, we'll also be working with OECD, WEF, and the EU. We've been working with the European Commission. We were involved most recently with the Poly Futures Conference, and we aim to draw on, of course, existing work, but expand that work to other countries and build the capacity more globally, including with our 58 field offices. So I just wanted to present a couple of case studies with some of the institutions with whom we've been working so that you can identify how this works in practice and the different kind of contexts that we're currently looking at. So one of the organizations with whom we've been working is the Foundations for Tomorrow in Australia. And they've been working to develop an Australian parliamentary group for future generations. So this parliamentary group helped to develop the first Well-being of Future Generations bill, which was introduced to Parliament in February 2025. We know that the bill has not yet been enacted, but this is still ongoing work. But it's very much based on the Wales Well-being of Future Generations bill that was adopted in 2015, which basically essentially aims to translate the UN Declaration on Futures Generations into national legislation. So in Wales, they have a Futures Commissioner, and they've been very successful in applying this across all of the Welsh public bodies. And it includes very specific goals, which goes beyond GDP to look at well-being indicators, which look at the economic, cultural, and environmental indicators. And they have reporting requirements and accountability mechanisms. So I think this is a really interesting example of how we can turn future generations, UN declarations on future generations into national legislation, which is then holds member states accountable. I just wanted to go through a few more. I have quite a few examples here, but one very interesting example is also from Chile, where they have a futures commission in the Senate. So Chile was one of the first global leaders in enacting neural rights legislation to protect your neural data. And this came about because of the work that they do with this global coalition of universities. So the universities provide research, cutting edge research on what are the emerging trends and challenges to the Futures Commission, and the Futures Commission then works to enact legislation. So I think this is a really good example of how we can concretely turn our work on futures into national legislation. And this legislation, since this technology is evolving, is also adaptive legislation. The original bill was drafted in 2019 and approved by the Senate in 2021, but it has already been updated more recently to take into new developments in terms of neurotechnology and AI systems. Maybe also just to mention the South African example. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the South African example, but I think this is also a good example of how we can use the futures to transition out of conflict situations. These were the Montfleur exercises. So we have a very notable chair, Tanya, I think that Roland knows, who's working in South Africa at Stellenbosch University. And she was very much involved in these Montfleur exercises, which really looked at how we could use different scenarios to identify how to get the country back on track, how to promote more social inclusion, but also kind of what were the economic decisions that needed to be taken. And they moved away from having a more, because of these different scenarios, they moved away from having a more macroeconomic populist policy. So I think this is also an interesting example of how this affected policies and legislations. And more recently, we're working with Kenya. Kenya has been working with youth on Kenya Youth Scenarios Project, which explores alternative futures for Kenya's youth. And this has helped to inform policy discussions on youth employment, education, and social development. The President, Ruto, has also recently developed a Senate Futures Caucus in Kenya. So this has led to a lot of legislation on futures. And they're applying this to budget security and public debt management. They're conducting annual foresight assessments of emerging issues. And as I mentioned, they've developed already legislation on AI, climate change, and other issues. They are also working to expand this capacity in other parts of Africa, and we're currently working with the Futures Caucus to see how we could develop a regional hub in Africa to expand capacity in this area. Yeah, let's see. Yeah. So maybe just to mention that through the Global Anticipatory Policy Coalition, we will be aiming to set up these regional hubs. So in each region of the world, we will be setting up Foresight hubs, working with our partners. So with Kenya and South Africa, we'll be working to establish a hub in Africa, but we will also be working with Chile to establish a hub also with the Latin American Bank, who has decided to provide us funding, and working in close cooperation with some of our UN development partners. With UNDP, we will also be developing a Foresight Center in Chile to expand capacity in this area. But just to mention that all of these examples that I mentioned, and of course there are many more, point to the example of the importance of having multi-stakeholder participation, institutionalizing foresight capacity, and having a long-term vision which is linked to a short-term action. So a number of countries, including Chile, have a Proyecto 2050. They engaged a number of experts in different disciplines to help them develop those vision for 2050. And even though they've had a change in government, they're still working to promote this with the new government change. So I think this is important to see how we can make sure that futures literacy and foresight is a way to bring communities together even when we have a change in government. And by institutionalizing it through futures commissions or within the Senate, we can make sure that this perpetuates after a change in government. Even if there's a change in priorities, this can help to institutionalize foresight rather than having a one-off exercise. So maybe just to also mention that we have identified a couple of building blocks. One, of course, is investing capacities in people. So this points to the importance of futures literacy from early stages of education, I would say, until higher education. And this is one of the areas where UNESCO is working to support a new research. We just recently, with Saudi Arabia, have endorsed a new Future Studies Prize. This is a prize for $5 million, and it will be $500,000 per year for this prize, which will be supporting early career researchers on future studies and looking at new research in new anticipatory systems. Another area that I mentioned is also the importance of leadership. So in terms of UNESCO, this is one area where we are also working to expand the importance of why we need to use futures literacy and foresight for UNESCO's own internal purposes, but also we've been supporting and providing through our visioning exercises, but also through capacity building with our member states on using futures literacy and foresight. Again, the importance of foresight units and ensuring that that is a key part of existing governance structures. A number of countries are now doing horizon scanning, scenario planning, and of course having these ongoing strategic foresight dialogues. It's not just a one-off process, but it has to be a continued dialogue. And then finally, I think, as also Roland mentioned, in terms of UN 2.0, we're really looking at how do we enhance a change in mindset. This is, of course, linked to looking at new research on behavioral science, but how can we effectively integrate that into policymaking? So I think I'll stop there, but I would like to encourage you all to join us in the Global Anticipatory Policy Coalition. We will be launching this on the 29th of September at the Management of Social Transformations Forum, which is part of a Social Transformations Week that we are organizing at UNESCO's headquarters in Paris. We will be organizing this with ministers, so this will be a high-level launch, and we look forward to working with you to help us build this capacity globally. So with that, I thank you very much.